My father was buried on a cold afternoon. My mother was on her way back from a business trip. That night, a photo flashed on the church's memorial screen. My mother at a Miami hotel bar, laughing with a man wearing a wedding ring. They thought I would cry. I did. But in front of the funeral's live stream camera, I began to overwrite everything they thought was hidden. My name is Lila Mercer, 31 years old, head of ethics and control at Grayline Biotech. I don't use knives for revenge. I use process. The Willow Ridge Chapel was suffocating. It wasn't just the cloying, sickly sweet smell of lilies fighting a losing battle against the scent of old, damp wood and decades of varnish. It was the air itself, heavy, gray, and wet. Outside, the sky was the color of unpolished steel, pressing a cold, misting rain against the stained glass windows. Fairpoint, our town, had draped itself in a respectable shroud of mourning. I stood beside the casket. It was a dark, gleaming mahogany, far too ornate for the man inside it. My father, Graham Mercer. His name was carved into a small brass plaque, and I watched the reflection of the chapel's weak fluorescent lights ripple across the polished letters. I saw my own face mirrored back, a pale, fractured mask floating above his name. My black sheath dress was professional, severe. My hair was pulled back into a knot so tight it made my temples ache. Good. The pain was grounding. The front pew, reserved for the immediate family, was half empty. My seat, and the empty one beside it, the one meant for my mother. Father Thomas, a man who had known me since Sunday school, cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone. A sharp, high-pitched feedback squeal cut through the organ music. He winced. "We are deeply grateful for all who could join us," he began, his voice amplified and unnaturally resonant. "For our friends and family unable to travel, we are live-streaming the service. The feed is now active." A small, discreet camera with a blinking red light was mounted on a tripod in the center aisle. I knew its feed was being piped directly to the memorial page on the funeral home's website. It was my mother's idea, arranged from afar, a gesture of inclusivity, a performance of modern mourning. My phone, clutched in my left hand inside my jacket pocket, vibrated silently. Not a call, not a text, a system notification. I didn't need to look. I knew exactly what it was. But I slid the phone out anyway, shielding the screen with my body, angling it away from the prying eyes of my father's business partners in the second row. The notification was from the Find My app, an item, not a person. AirTag, Mom's Toomey suitcase. Last seen 2 minutes ago at the Palmetto Bay Hotel. Miami. On her way back, she had texted me this morning. Connecting flight from Chicago was canceled. Weather, I'm devastated. Be strong for me. Miami was not on the way from Chicago. Miami was where the sun was shining, where the cocktails were cold, and where, apparently, her luggage was enjoying a 2-minute-old update at a luxury resort. The lie was so lazy it was insulting. I'd slipped the tag into her suitcase lining 6 months ago, after a series of consulting weekends that correlated perfectly with new suspicious wire transfers from the company accounts. I am, after all, in ethics and control. I control for risk. My thumb hovered over the notification. I felt a cold, sharp click in my chest. A mechanism engaging. The grief was still there, a heavy, toxic fog. But this was a signal flare cutting through it. This was data. "We now begin the slideshow tribute to Graham's life," Father Thomas announced, gesturing to the large projector screen that had descended from a recess in the ceiling. The first photo appeared, my father, 25, grinning, holding a thick textbook at his Stanford graduation. Click. My father and his partner, Ron, cutting a ribbon on the first Grayline Biotech office, little more than a garage. Click, my father holding me as a baby, his face awash in a clumsy, terrified joy I hadn't seen in years. I watched the images of the man who taught me to read a balance sheet before I could ride a bike, the man who would quiz me on SEC regulations at the dinner table, smiling and calling it sharpening the tools, the man who, 3 weeks ago, had called me late at night, his voice thin. "Lila," he'd said. "Don't trust the ledgers, not all of them." He'd hung up before I could ask which ones. Click, a photo of him at last year's gala. My mother on his arm. They looked perfect. Corporate royalty, the golden couple of Fairpoint. Click. The screen changed. It wasn't another sepia-toned memory. This was high resolution, bright, now. My mother, her face flushed and laughing, her black mourning blouse replaced by a silk shell top the color of champagne. She was leaning against a polished mahogany bar, a martini glass in her hand. Beside her, a man in a crisp blue suit, his back partially to the camera. His hand was resting on the small of her back, fingers spread possessively. On his left ring finger, a thick gold band gleamed under the warm, intimate lighting of the bar. The logo for the Palmetto Bay Hotel was clearly visible, etched into the mirror behind them. A collective, sharp intake of breath sucked the air from the chapel. It was a sound like dry leaves scattering across pavement. Someone in the back row dropped a hymnal. It hit the wooden floor with a dull, definitive thud. The technician, hidden in the back, must have panicked. The image vanished, replaced by a black screen. A moment later, a photo of my father fishing on Lake Michigan appeared, but it was too late. The damage was done. The seal was broken. A low murmur started, the sound of a hornet's nest disturbed. Whispers of, "Who was that? And was that?" Father Thomas coughed, a dry, papery sound. A technical, a misplaced file. Our apologies. Let us continue with Graham's legacy. They thought I would break. They thought I would crumble. The dutiful, grieving daughter, humiliated in front of her entire town. I could feel the pitying stares, the vicarious shame. I did cry. A single, hot tear escaped my right eye and tracked a perfectly straight, cold line down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. Instead, I looked up. I bypassed the shuffling congregation, the flustered priest, the dark casket. I found the small, blinking red light of the live stream camera. I looked directly into its lens. I held its gaze. I let it register the tear, but I also let it register the absolute stillness of my face. I was not crumbling. I was broadcasting. My right hand, steady as a surgeon's, brought my phone back up. I didn't hide it this time. I opened my secure corporate email client. To Anya. Cole@grayline.com, Caroline, Mercer@grayline.com, Lila, Mercer@grayline.com. Subject: Hold for records. 10-24-2025, 1417 Este. I attached the screenshot of the AirTag notification. I attached the photo from the bar, which a friend in Miami had sent me not 20 minutes before the service, the one that had been accidentally slipped into the memorial slideshow feed by my own instruction to the AV tech I'd hired personally. He thought he was embedding a surprise tribute. I knew I was documenting discovery. I hit send. The email was now logged on the corporate server, time-stamped, and discoverable under any future litigation or internal investigation. Anya Cole was our general counsel. She would see it, and she would understand the hold for records instruction. She would not delete it. She would, in fact, be legally bound to preserve it. I looked back at the casket. I leaned in, close enough that my lips almost brushed the polished wood. "I see it, Dad," I whispered, so low that only the polished brass plaque could hear me. "I see it all." My phone vibrated again, this time a text message from my mother. The signal must be terrible on her delayed flight. Plane delayed. Awful turbulence. Just seeing this. Yes'm, don't make a scene. We will talk tonight. This is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. He was a misunderstanding. The hand on her back was a misunderstanding. The $420,000 payment to his consulting firm last week, the one I'd flagged, was just a misunderstanding. I held the power and volume buttons. Click. The screenshot was saved. I opened my Secure Files app. Navigating past encrypted audit reports and whistleblower case files, I created a new folder. I titled it, Public. I saved the screenshot of her text message. It sat next to the screenshot of the AirTag. They looked neat together. Evidence. Father Thomas was speaking again. Something about ashes to ashes, but the words were just white noise. The organist began to play a recessed, somber tune. The funeral directors, two men in identical black suits, moved to the front. One of them looked at me, his expression a practiced, gentle inquiry. He was asking for permission to close the casket. I nodded, just once. I reached out and placed my hand on the cold mahogany. I didn't say I love you or goodbye. I said, "It's done." They began to close the lid. The heavy slab of wood moved with a smooth, oiled precision. It shut with a soft, final click. It was the sound of a lock engaging, the sound of a project being initiated. In the manufactured twilight of the chapel, under the gaze of 100 pitying eyes and one blinking red camera, my plan began to unspool. Cold, clean, and documented. The reception was held in the parish hall adjacent to the chapel. The air, thankfully, was different. The heavy, damp scent of old wood and lilies was replaced by the sharp, acidic aroma of bulk brewed coffee and the bland, sugary smell of catering pastry. People I hadn't seen in years formed a line, their faces arranged in masks of practiced sympathy. They'd take my hand, their skin either too dry or too damp, and murmur the requisite phrases. "So sorry for your loss. He was a great man. Your mother, is she holding up?" "She's on her way," I replied, the lie tasting like sawdust. "Flight delays, the weather." They would nod, satisfied. Weather was an acceptable, neutral antagonist, a shared enemy. The Fairpoint Gazette had once called us the Mercer model. There was a picture, framed and hanging in the Gray Line lobby, of the three of us at the annual Founders Ball, my father, Graham Mercer, co-founder and visionary CEO. His hand on my shoulder, my mother, Caroline, immaculate in navy silk, her hand on his arm, and me, fresh-faced from Wharton, already a rising star at a Big Four accounting firm in New York. We were the town's quiet dynasty. Grayline Biotech wasn't just a company. It was Fairpoint's flagship. We weren't just a family. We were an asset. The article praised my father's relentless innovation and my mother's steady financial hand. When she had stepped in as interim CFO 8 months ago after the previous one retired abruptly, the board had breathed a collective sigh of relief. Keeping it in the family, Ron, my father's partner, had boomed approvingly. Now, as I accepted a plastic cup of coffee, I watched those same people, board members, junior executives, town council members, coagulate in small, whispering groups. They would look at me, offer a weak, sad smile, then turn back to their huddle. They had all seen the screen. They had all seen the man in the blue suit. The Mercer model was showing a crack in its foundation. I had returned to Fairpoint and to Grayline just last year. It was a surprise to many. I had a clear path to partnership in New York, a life I had meticulously built, walled off from the claustrophobia of my hometown. But my father had asked. I remember the call. He hadn't asked me to come home as his daughter. He'd recruited me as an auditor. I was in his study, the one room in the house that smelled truly his, old leather, pipe tobacco, a habit he'd supposedly quit, and that faint, metallic tang of aging electronics. He poured 2 glasses of single malt. He never drank with me. That should have been the first warning. "You're the best auditor I know, Lila," he'd said, sliding the glass across his desk. "I need you at Grayline." "I'm an auditor. Dad, you're the CEO. It's a conflict of interest." "I'll create a new role, head of ethics and control, independent, reporting directly to the board. Bypasses me, bypasses your mother, fully autonomous." He leaned forward, the desk lamp catching the gray in his hair. "I need someone to watch the door. I need to know the locks are sound, so I can finally get some sleep." I'd laughed. Worried about the big bad wolf? Competitors? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Something like that. Watch the door, Lila. Just watch the door. I took the job. I thought he was worried about industrial espionage. Or perhaps that Ron, his affable partner, was getting too comfortable. I never imagined the threat he was worried about slept in his own bed. My mother had protested my appointment, beautifully. Of course, she'd framed it as concern for me. "Darling, are you sure?" she'd asked over brunch, her fork hovering over a piece of cantaloupe. "It's such a rigid role. You're so good with people. This ethics position, it's all black and white. This company, any company," she'd corrected, "needs flexibility to thrive. It needs shades of gray." "Gray is just a euphemism for undocumented," I'd said, sipping my water. She'd given me her patient smile, the one she used on bankers and toddlers. "You're so principled, Lila. It's what makes you you. But the real world isn't an exam. You can't just apply a rule and expect life to fall in line." "I thought that's exactly what control meant," I'd replied. Her smile had tightened. "Just don't audit the life out of the place. We're a family." That was 6 months ago. The flexibility she'd championed started to appear in my quarterly reviews of the general ledger. It began as a trickle. Small. Prepaid expense advances to new vendors. Prepaid is a flag. It means you're paying for something you haven't received yet. It's a risk, a hole in the balance sheet, and a beautiful place to park money you don't want anyone to understand. The descriptions were corporate smoke. Strategic consulting fees, market integration services, brand realignment advisory. They were ghosts. The vendors had new LLCs, addresses that traced back to mail drops in Delaware, and no digital footprint, and the payments were all approved by the same person, Caroline Mercer, interim CFO. My team, 2 junior analysts I'd hired from outside Fairpoint, flagged them. I told them to dig. One name kept surfacing, not as a vendor, but in the approval chain, attached to the memos that justified the advances. A consultant who, apparently, had my mother's ear. Harbor and Slate Consultants. Unlike the others, this one was real. It had an office in Miami. It had a website. It had a director. Julian Cross. I was in my office. 2 a.m. The blue light of my monitor painting my face. When I ran the name, I cross-referenced it with my mother's T&E reports, her finance conference in Orlando, her investor meeting in Atlanta. Funny how both trips involved weekend layovers in Miami. And then I did an image search. The man from the bar. The man in the crisp blue suit. The man whose hand was spread on my mother's back as she laughed, holding a martini, while my father was being pronounced dead in his office. Julian Cross, the recipient of $420,000 in prepaid strategic consulting fees from Grayline Biotech, approved by my mother. I looked at the funeral photo again, the one I'd saved to the public folder. The man in the picture wasn't just an affair. He was a vendor. He wasn't just a lover. He was a conspiracy. My father had tried to tell me, in the last 2 months, his health seemed to plummet. The robust, tireless man I knew was replaced by a gray, hollow-eyed ghost who startled at loud noises. 3 separate times, he'd put an urgent catch-up on my calendar. The first time, he canceled. "Rain check, honey, board call." The second time, he'd shown up at my office door, looked past me at my 2 analysts, and just paused. "Later," he'd muttered, and walked away. The third meeting never happened. He sent a text message an hour before. One I had read so many times it was burned into my memory. "Can't talk, not secure. Just remember, Lila. Don't trust the balance sheet completely. Not all of it." A week later, he filed for his withdrawal from the board. The paperwork was rushed. Immediate effect, citing personal health reasons, I pulled the file from the corporate secretary's office. I looked at his signature on the bottom. Graham Mercer. It was his name, but it wasn't his hand. The strong, confident loop of his G was cramped and shaky. The M staggered, as if the pen had been too heavy to hold. It was the signature of a man under duress, or a man who was profoundly physically ill, or both. Now, standing in the parish hall, The pieces were no longer just pieces, they were a mosaic. My mother, the interim CFO, was siphoning company money to her lover, Julian Cross, under the guise of consulting fees. My father, the CEO, had discovered it. He'd hired me, his auditor daughter, to watch the door, a desperate, arm's-length attempt to save his company from his own wife. He'd tried to warn me, but had been silenced or scared into canceling, and then he'd signed away his control of the company. And then he'd died. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Michael, as my mother's text had claimed. This was fraud. This was a breach of fiduciary duty. This was malice. My phone was still in my pocket. My hand was steady as I picked up another flavorless cookie. I had started my archive the day I read his text. I used my administrator-level access. I created a full, bit-for-bit image of my mother's corporate drive. I exported every email, every calendar item, every T&E log. I pulled the wire transfer authorizations from the bank portal. I backed up the VPN logs, showing her logging in from Miami when she was supposed to be in Chicago. I saved the travel itineraries, booked by her executive assistant, showing paired tickets, companion flights. I saved the phone records. I encrypted the entire file. I uploaded it to a secure, air-gapped server that had no connection to Greyline. Then I copied it to a hard drive, which was now sitting in a safe deposit box at a bank 3 towns over. I am the head of ethics and control. I am a professional. I don't act on emotion. I act on evidence. Ron, my father's partner, shambled over. His eyes were red. He was genuinely grieving. "Lila," he said, his voice thick. "It's good you're here. With your mother?" Delayed. "We need you. We need the family to be strong." I looked at this kind, oblivious man who had built a company with my father. "Don't worry, Ron," I said, my voice perfectly level, perfectly calm. "I am here, and I will be. I'm going to protect my father's legacy. You have my word." He patted my shoulder. "Good girl. He'd be so proud." I watched him walk away. Proud? No. He'd be horrified, but he'd be satisfied. I finished my coffee. The audit had begun. The funeral was just the opening entry. I didn't go home. The house on Willow Ridge was a stage set for a life that had just been revealed as a fiction. It was full of my father's books, his scent, the echo of his laugh. It was also full of my mother's clothes, her perfume, her meticulously curated lies. I couldn't breathe there. I went to the office. The Greyline Biotech Tower was a column of dark glass, a monolith of my father's ambition. At 4:17 p.m., the lobby was subdued. The flag out front was at half-mast. The security guard, Mike, a man who had known me since I was a teenager, just nodded, his face etched with sympathy. "A terrible day. Ms. Mercer, we're all thinking of you." "Thank you." "Mike," I said, my voice flat. I swiped my access card. The elevator chimed, a polite, sterile sound, and carried me to the 24th floor. My office was separated from the main executive wing by a set of frosted glass doors. Ethics and control. Most people called it the aquarium, or, less charitably, the confessional. It was a room designed for silence and observation. I sat at my desk, the skyline of Fairpoint turning a bruised purple as the sun set. I did not weep, I did not rage, I booted my workstation. My role was not just a title, it was a mandate. My father had built it for me, a key to every lock in the company. I opened the governance, risk, and compliance GRC portal. I pulled up the Greyline Corporate Charter, Article 4, Section 2, Internal Investigations. I read the lines I had helped draft. The head of ethics and control is authorized and required to initiate a full internal investigation upon reasonable suspicion of material fraud, conflicts of interest, or a breach of fiduciary duty by any officer, director, or employee of the company. Reasonable suspicion. The AirTag ping, the photograph, the $420,000 in ghost vendor payments. I had bypassed reasonable and landed squarely in irrefutable. I opened our encrypted case management system, a secure access portal that not even our IT department could penetrate. File, new case. Case ID, 1711. Case name, Harbor Line. Case, type, material fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty. Conflict of interest. Status, active, level 1. Confidential, highest. This was the formal declaration of war. An investigation of this type, against a C-level officer, required a second key. I had to grant access to the only two people in the organization bound by the same legal privilege and independence as I was. Grant read-only access. Anya. Cole, General Counsel. Grant read-only access. David. Peterson, Independent Board Secretary. Anya was Grayline's corporate lawyer. She was sharp, pragmatic, and hated messes. An undisclosed affair with a vendor was a mess. An affair linked to $420,000 in unverified payments wasn't a mess. It was a 5-alarm fire. David was a retired judge, the board's independent secretary. His only loyalty was to the company charter, not to the people in the boardroom. I hit enter. The case was live. Anya and David would have just received an automated high-priority alert. Now, I began to populate the file. This was not a personal archive. This was a prosecution. I initiated a privileged admin query on the financial backend. I didn't need to hunt. I knew where the bodies were buried. I pulled every invoice, every wire transfer, every expense report approved by Caroline. Mercer in the last 6 months. The pattern wasn't just damning, it was lazy. Approval. 09/04/2025. Vendor, Harbor and Slate. Amount, $100,000. Approved by C. Mercer. Timestamp, 9:02:15 a.m. Approval, 09/28/2025. Vendor, Harbor and Slate. Amount, $150,000. Approved by C. Mercer. Timestamp, 9:02:15 a.m. Approval, 10/19/2025. Vendor, Harbor and Slate. Amount, $170,000. Approved by C. Mercer. Timestamp, 9:02:15 a.m. She hadn't even bothered to vary the time. It was a script, a digital rubber stamp, an automated approval macro that triggered every morning at 9:02 a.m., processing any invoice from her lover's firm without review. This wasn't negligence. This was collusion. But the consulting fees were just the appetizer. The real question was why? Why now? What was Julian Cross consulting on? I cross-referenced her business trip, the one she was currently on, the one in Miami, her public calendar, shared with her assistant, said she was at the Midwest Biointegration Summit in Chicago. Her text message had claimed bad weather and delayed flights. I pulled the M&A pipeline files from the corporate strategy drive. We were in the final stages of acquiring a small, promising diagnostic startup based in Florida. Codename, Project Nautilus. The deal was closing. Today, October 24th, the day of my father's funeral. I scrolled through the acquisition brief, my fingers cold on the keys, and there it was, on page 3, under Advisory and Integration Partners. Strategic advisory services for Project Nautilus provided by Harbor and Slate Consultants. My breath hitched. This was 1,000 times worse. My mother, the interim CFO of Grayline, was in Miami with her undisclosed lover, Julian Cross, to close a deal acquiring a company that he was advising. She was, in effect, negotiating against herself, using my father's company as her personal bank. The $420,000 wasn't just theft, it was the grease to make the deal happen. A success fee paid out before the success was even announced. This was the kill shot, the one, simple, undeniable piece of paper that turned adultery and theft into a catastrophic corporate crime. I navigated to the HR portal. I accessed the executive files. Every officer, upon hiring and annually, is required to sign the Conflict of Interest (COI) disclosure form. I pulled Caroline Mercer Coy Disclosure FY25 PDF. I scrolled to Section 4, Personal and Financial Relationships. Question 4.1. Do you have any personal, romantic, or close familial relationship with any vendor, supplier, consultant, or third-party agent currently receiving or contracted to receive funds from Greyline Biotech? Her answer, a neat digital checkmark, no. Her digital signature was at the bottom, dated just 3 months ago. This was the weapon. The wire transfers were the motive. The affair was the context. But this document, this provable material lie to the board and to our shareholders, was the execution. I couldn't just have this information. I had to prove it. Beyond any shadow of a doubt, I had to establish an unbreakable chain of custody. This is where my years at the Big Four paid off. I was not a grieving daughter. I was an auditor finalizing a report. I began to log the evidence into Case 1711. Exhibit A, digital photo, IMG 9402.jpg. Source, T. Harris, AV technician. Location, Palmetto Bay Hotel. Subjects, C. Mercer, J. Cross. I ran a cryptographic hash, SHA-256, on the source file. I logged the resulting string, 8A2B, FE9. Exhibit B, screenshot, AirTag, notification, PNG, timestamp, 10/24/2025. 1403, Est, location, the Palmetto Bay Hotel, Miami, hash, 4E1C, CC0. Exhibit C, document, Project Nautilus Brief 5 Final, PDF, page 3, hash, 9B3A, DA1. Exhibit D, document, Caroline Mercer Key Oi, disclosure FY25.pdf, section 4.1, hash, 1F0D, AB4. Exhibit E, ledger export, CFO approvals Q3, Q4 CSV. Timestamps 9:02:15 a.m. Hash 5G2E, BB7. The files were uploaded, hashed, and sealed in the case file. I set the permissions to write once, read many. Not even I could alter them now. No one could ever accuse me of fabricating evidence in a fit of grief. The chain was clean. The case was built. The digital guillotine was constructed. Now, how to use it. I could send a summary to David Peterson. He would convene an emergency board meeting. Lawyers would swarm. She would be quietly, gracefully allowed to resign. She would cite the unbearable tragedy of my father's death. She would keep her severance, her reputation, and her stock options. The company would write off the $420,000 as a bad consulting expense. The world would see a grieving widow. No. My mother had used the public spectacle of my father's funeral to cover her tracks. She had counted on my grief to blind me. She had counted on propriety to silence me. I would use a different kind of spectacle. She had chosen to perform her lies in public. I would choose to deliver the truth the same way. I pulled up my calendar. Tomorrow night, Friday, October 25th. Event, Fairpoint Chamber of Commerce, Annual Legacy Dinner. Honoree, Greyline Biotech. For outstanding community and corporate leadership, keynote speaker. My father had been scheduled to accept the award. In his place, the program had been updated just this morning. Accepting on behalf of Greyline, Caroline Mercer, CFO. It was perfect. The entire business community of Fairpoint, the mayor, the press, the Fairpoint Gazette, local Channel 5 would be there, broadcasting it live for the community. I opened a new calendar appointment for myself, 7 p.m. Tomorrow, subject, present findings, case 1711, location, Fairpoint Grand Ballroom. Notes, do not disclose until cameras are rolling. Ensure audio feed is live. I opened PowerPoint. I pulled the official Greyline presentation template. I created a single, new slide. I typed, Legacy and Integrity. A commitment to the principles of Graham Mercer. I saved the file to an encrypted USB drive and attached it to my keychain, next to my office key. I leaned back in my chair. The office was pitch black now. save for the glow of my monitor. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. But it was no longer just grief. It was fuel. She had betrayed him. She had betrayed his company. She had betrayed me. I pulled a sticky note from the dispenser on my desk. I wrote 2 sentences on it, a personal addendum to the case file. Forgiveness can come later. Truth comes first. I stuck it to the base of my monitor, logged out of the system, and stood up. The trap was set. All the parts were sterile, professional, and cold. I just had to wait 24 hours for my mother to fly home, tanned and triumphant, and walk right into it. The hours between the funeral reception and dawn were a vacuum. I spent them on the 24th floor, under the cold, silent hum of the HVAC system. Grief, I was learning, was not a flood of emotion. It was a cold, clarifying anger. It was an audit query that wouldn't close. The official report from the Fairpoint coroner was on my screen, forwarded by HR as a formality. Cause of death: massive hemorrhagic stroke. Time of death: estimated 10:30 p.m. October 23rd. Location: private office, 25th floor, Gray Line Tower. He had died alone, at his desk, the desk where he'd taught me to read a P&L statement. An auditor doesn't accept the front page of a report. An auditor reads the footnotes. An auditor verifies the source data. My father had died in his office, in a building I had total system-level access to. I opened the building management logs. I started with the security cameras. The main hallway on the 25th floor, the one leading to the executive suites, had 1 camera. I spooled the footage. At 9:58 p.m., my father is seen walking into his office. He looks tired, his shoulders slumped. He doesn't look back. At 9:59 p.m., the feed cuts to a blue screen. A time-stamped text overlay appears. KM 2501, offline for scheduled maintenance. It stayed offline. I cross-referenced the IT maintenance schedule. There was no maintenance scheduled for any camera system last night. I pulled the server power logs. It wasn't maintenance. The camera's power source had been remotely cut via an admin command. The power was restored at 10:42 p.m. 43 minutes, a 43-minute black hole in the official record, precisely coinciding with his death. My fingers flew. I pulled the keycard access logs for the 25th floor. 9:58 p.m. G. Mercer. Access granted. 25th. FL main door. 10:13 p.m. C. Mercer. Access granted. 25th FL. Main door. 10:41 p.m. C. Mercer. Access granted. 25th FL main door. Exit. My mother, not on a delayed flight, not in Chicago. She was here, in the building. She had entered his office hallway 15 minutes after he did, and she left 1 minute before the camera came back online. A cold dread, far deeper than grief, settled in my stomach. I was moving from corporate fraud into something else, something dark and suffocating. I needed to break her alibi. She claimed she was in Chicago. The AirTag proved she was in Miami today, for the funeral. But where was she last night? I had a copy of her corporate credit card statements. I'd pulled them for case 1711. I opened the file. Transaction, 10/23/2025, 10:35 p.m. ET. Charge, $1,402.19. Vendor, the Palmetto Bay Hotel. Miami. The charge was for a room. You don't pay for a room at 10:30 at night unless you're checking in or checking out. I called the hotel's main line, my voice smooth and professional. Hi, this is Lila Mercer. I'm Mr. Julian Cross's executive assistant. He's in meetings and asked me to confirm his checkout details from last night. Yes, I'll hold. A perky voice returned. Yes, ma'am. I see Mr. Cross and Ms. Mercer. Oh, sorry. Just a Ms. Mercer. In our King Suite. They checked out late last night, around 10:30 p.m. Looks like they just paid for the one night. Oh, and the bar tab. At 10:35 p.m., as my father was dying in his office, my mother was in Miami, paying the bill for a double room with her lover. But the keycard log, The 10:13 p.m. entry, it contradicted the hotel bill. How could she be in Miami and Fairpoint at the same time? I stared at the two data points. C. Mercer. Access granted. 10:13 p.m. and a hotel charge in Miami at 10:35 p.m. Wait, my mind was catching on the wrong detail. I looked at the hotel charge again. The timestamp was 10:35 p.m. Assessed. Eastern Standard Time. Miami. I looked at the keycard log. 10:13 p.m. Our servers ran on. Est. She was not in two places. The hotel charge was her checking out. Late, after the act, after the confrontation, after whatever happened in that office. My mind was racing. The keycard log was 10:13 p.m. The hotel bill was... Wait, I had it wrong. I reread the credit card line item. Transaction, 10/23/2025, 10:35 p.m. Este, that was the billing timestamp. When the charge posted, not when she paid. I pulled the other file, the one I had archived. Her personal car. My father had paid for it. It was on the company insurance plan, which meant I had access to its telematics. I opened the GPS log. 10/23/2025, 9:01 p.m. Vehicle departed, 14 Willow Ridge Ward, home. 10/23/2025, 9:15 p.m. Vehicle arrived at Gray Line Tower, parking garage. 10/23/2025, 10:45 Vehicle departed Gray Line Tower, parking garage. 10/23/2012, 11:30 p.m. Vehicle arrived at Fairpoint International Airport. 10/24/2025, 1:15 a.m. Flight 441, AA, Fairpoint to Miami. She wasn't in Miami when he died. She was here. She had confronted him in his office. She was in that hallway, in that room, during the 43-minute camera outage. She was there when he had the stroke. And then, after he was dead, she had left. She had driven to the airport and taken a 1:15 a.m. red-eye to Miami, to her lover, to close the deal. She had left her husband to be found by the cleaning crew. The wire transfer, the $420,000, had posted 2 days ago. It was labeled Project Nautilus Integration Fee. It was the money for Julian Cross. The sequence was sickeningly clear. She and Cross planned the acquisition. They needed my father's CEO signature to push it through. He must have found out about them, about the scheme. He refused. He tried to warn me. He tried to change his will. I went to his personal drive. I had his passwords. I typed them in. My fingers numb. His desktop was clean. One file, a Word document, saved just yesterday afternoon. Draft Will V3 DocX. I opened it. It was a new last will and testament. It was simple, direct. It left his personal effects to me. It left his share of the company to the board, to be held in trust for an employee stock ownership program. He was cutting her out. He was cutting me out to save the company from his own family. I scrolled to the section on his personal life insurance policy, a substantial, 8-figure policy. The beneficiary line was blank. A blinking cursor sat on the dotted line, as if he had been interrupted before he could type a name. There was one other file, in his drafts folder, an email to me, Lila Reed, MSG. It was timed 9:50 p.m., 10 minutes before the camera went out. It had never been sent. Subject: keep it clean. Lila. I made a mistake. I let her in. The board. The books. I thought it would keep her close. It just gave her keys. She's not the woman I married. This isn't the company I built. I'm fixing it. I'm fixing the will. I'm killing the Nautilus deal. She will fight me. Don't let her. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to finish. Keep the company clean, even from me. Your rules, your process, it's the only way. It ended there. He was writing this when she walked in at 10:13 p.m. My phone, his personal phone, was in the evidence bag the police had given me. I powered it on. It lit up, one item, an unsent audio note, a voicemail. To me, I pressed play. His voice was a rasp, airless, terrified. Lila, the deal, don't let her. Don't let them turn me into a number. Just a number on a page, a sharp noise, the sound of a door. The recording stopped. This was the why. This was the confrontation. She had arrived. He was trying to stop the deal. He was writing me. He was trying to change the will. And she had, what? Argued with him? Yelled at him until his blood pressure spiked and his brain burst? Or just watched him clutch his chest, watched him fall, and then simply waited 43 minutes for it to be over before walking out, getting in her car, and flying to her lover? I closed my eyes. The image was unbearable. But I forced it down. The cold, clear voice of the auditor returned. I could not prove she was criminally responsible for his death. Speculation was a trap. It was a personal grievance. It was weakness. I would not accuse her of murder. I would not accuse her of manslaughter. The 43-minute gap was a camera maintenance issue. The GPS log was irrelevant personal travel. The unsent letter was the rambling of a sick man. A good lawyer would shred it all as the fantasy of a grieving, hysterical daughter. But I could prove the conflict of interest. I could prove the $420,000 wire transfer to her lover. I could prove the false SEC disclosure. I could prove the violation of her fiduciary duty. I would not go to the police with a story about my mother. I would go to the Chamber of Commerce, to the board, to the live stream, with a case file. My father's words echoed, "Your rules, your process, it's the only way." He was right. I would stick to the facts. I would not speculate. I would present the evidence, clean and irrefutable. I would not talk about his death. I would talk about his legacy, and I would use her own lies to tear her down, not my suspicions. I logged the hotel bill, the GPS data, and the wire transfer into case 1711. I kept the draft will and the voicemail for myself. They were not evidence. They were resolve. The rest of the night was a series of precise, sterile clicks, a mouse click to send an email, a printer click to create a hard copy, the click of a deadbolt as I finally entered my own, empty apartment at 3 a.m. I didn't sleep. I showered, the water scalding hot, and dressed, not in black. I chose a dark gray flannel suit, razor sharp, with a white silk blouse. It was armor. It was my Big Four uniform. It was the last thing my mother would expect. At 7 a.m., my phone buzzed. My mother finally landed in Fairpoint. "Lila, darling, I'm home. That was the worst travel day of my life. I'm exhausted, but I'll see you at the house. We must talk. That photo was a terrible misunderstanding. Julian is a colleague. I need you to believe me." I looked at the text. Colleague. She was sticking to the script. Good. I replied, my voice just as smooth, just as false. "Mom, I'm so glad you're back. Don't worry about the photo. We're all emotional. It's forgotten. I have good news. The Chamber of Commerce is renaming the award for Dad tonight. They're calling it the Graham Mercer Legacy Award now. It's the keynote. They need you to accept it. It will be a beautiful tribute." Her reply was almost instant. "Oh, Lila, that's wonderful. Of course. Yes, I'll be there." It's what he would have wanted. 7 p.m.? The hook was set. She saw a stage for her final performance as the grieving, steadfast widow. She didn't see the gallows. My next call was to Julian Cross. His number was on the Project Nautilus file. He picked up on the third ring, his voice smooth and confident. "Julian Cross." "Mr. Cross, this is Lila Mercer, head of ethics at Grayline Biotech." A fractional pause. Ms. Mercer, my deepest condolences. Your father was a giant. I was so sorry to hear the news." "Thank you. I'm calling because my mother, Caroline, is accepting a legacy award on my father's behalf tonight at the Chamber of Commerce dinner. She mentioned how integral you were to the Nautilus integration. She would be so pleased if you would attend as Grayline's honored partner. We have a seat for you at our corporate table." The bait was different, but just as potent. Recognition, public validation, an invitation to sit at the right hand of the new power structure. Of course, Lila. I would be honored to be there, to support Caroline and the company. Absolutely. 7 p.m. 7 p.m., I confirmed, and hung up. The second hook was set. Now the stage. The in-house AV team for the chamber was fine, but I needed my own record. I called the independent video production house I'd used for the funeral. Tim? Lila Mercer. I need you at the Fairpoint Grand Ballroom tonight. I want a 3-camera setup. One fixed on the podium, one on the head table, one for wide shots. I also need a direct, isolated audio feed from the podium microphone. The chamber has its own live stream, but I'm hiring you to capture a clean, archival quality feed for the Gray Line corporate records. No logos, just the raw footage, uploaded to the secure drive I provided. Yes, the same one. I was building the evidence locker in real time. The funeral was the opening deposition. Tonight was the cross-examination. Next, the agenda. I called David Peterson, the board secretary. David, it's Lila. I'm glad I caught you. You'll be at the dinner tonight, correct? Wouldn't miss it. Lila, we're all here to support Caroline and your father's memory. About that, David, I have to inform you, pursuant to Article 4, that I have opened a formal investigation, Case 1711. It concerns a material conflict of interest at the executive level. The line went silent. David, the retired judge, understood the gravity of those words. Lila, he said, his voice low and sharp. Who? I will be presenting my initial findings tonight, at the dinner. Tonight? At a public dinner? Lila, that is, highly irregular. These matters are handled in a closed-door session. The breach was public. David, I said, my voice cold as ice. The misunderstanding at the funeral has already started rumors that are threatening shareholder confidence. We need a public, decisive reaffirmation of our integrity. I need you to add one item to the program, right after Caroline's speech, a board commitment to the Graham Mercer Ethics Pledge. Just a single-slide pledge. I'm sending it to you now. I need you to be the one to read it from the stage, as the board's independent voice. Can you do that? He was quiet for a moment. He was connecting the dots. The misunderstanding, the investigation, the public pledge. He was seeing the shape of the trap. Yes, Lila, he said finally. If your case is sound, the charter supports this. A public reaffirmation. I'll have it inserted. I'll be there. Now, the props. My printer was already warm. Document 1. The invoice from the Palmetto Bay Hotel. King Suite. 1 night. Guests. 2. The bar tab with 2 martini glasses. Document 2. The wire transfer confirmation for $420,000 to Harbor and Slate Consultants. Document 3. My mother's signed conflict of interest disclosure. The word no circled in red ink. I sealed each one in a plain, white, 9x12 envelope, no labels. They felt heavy in my hand, heavy as bricks. I was not done. This had to be locked in, legally. I drove downtown, not to the police, but to the City Hall Annex, the office of the district attorney, Commercial Fraud Division. As head of ethics, I was a mandatory reporter. I filed a formal whistleblower report, a 10-page summary of Case 1711. I included the key evidence, the COI form, the wire transfers, the acquisition brief. I alleged a breach of fiduciary duty and material corporate fraud. A clerk, looking bored, stamped my copy. Received, October 25th, 2025. 11:32 a.m. The clock was now ticking. The report was now a public record. It could not be buried by a board-hired law firm. I had just set fire to the escape boat. My last stop was Fairpoint Community College. I met the dean of business in his small, cluttered office. Dean Miller, I said, shaking his hand. My father loved this school. Gray Line is pledging a $500,000 endowment for a new scholarship. We'll sign the papers today. His eyes widened. Lila, this is incredibly generous. What's it for? The Graham Mercer Integrity Scholarship for students of business ethics. I slid the contract across his desk. It was standard. until the final addendum, Article 7, Morality Clause. The endowment, I explained, is contingent. The funds, principal and interest, are locked for 1 year. They will be released provided that no senior officer of Greyline Biotech, including the CFO or CEO, is found by the board or a court of law to be in material breach of the company's own code of conduct during that period. If a breach is found, the funds are immediately forfeited and returned. The dean read it, his brow furrowing. This is unusual. My father was a principled man, I said. This honors his legacy. The company must be as clean as the students it supports. He knew a gift horse when he saw one, even if it had a strange bridle. He signed, I signed. I had just created a $500,000 financial incentive for the board to act on my findings. If they buried my report to save the company's reputation, they would lose $500,000 and be publicly shamed for voiding an ethics scholarship. At 5 APA, I was the first person in the Fairpoint Grand Ballroom. It was a sea of round tables draped in white linen. The centerpieces were, impossibly, white lilies, the same cloying, sickly sweet smell from the funeral. My stomach tightened. I walked to the stage. I found the head table. I placed the 3 white envelopes by my assigned seat, next to the podium. I found my technician, Tim. He was already setting up his cameras, independent of the main feed. The podium mic, I said. Is your audio feed isolated? Yes'm, he said. Crystal clear. Separate recorder. No one can cut it. Good. I stepped up to the podium. The heavy carved wood monstrosity reeked of furniture polish. I tapped the microphone. A soft thump-thump echoed through the empty hall. I leaned in, my voice just above a whisper, testing the levels. Hello? Fairpoint? Testing? 1, 2, 3. My gaze fell on the massive screen behind the stage. The chamber had already put up the title card. It was a large, smiling photo of my father from last year's gala. He was looking right at me. I stood there for a long moment, the scent of lilies and polish filling my lungs. I see it, Dad, I whispered, my hand on the podium. Watch me stitch this shut. I walked off the stage. The doors to the lobby opened. The first guests, a polite murmur of cocktail hour conversation, began to drift in. The lights on the stage brightened, bathing the empty chairs and the picture of my father in a warm, expectant glow. The show was about to begin. The ballroom was a sea of polite, sympathetic faces, the air thick with the scent of roasted chicken and table wine. My mother, Caroline Mercer, was seated at the center of the head table, a perfect portrait of tragic dignity. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, her hair immaculate. She smiled sadly at the nods from the town's elite, dabbing the corner of her eye with a lace handkerchief. Julian Cross sat 2 seats down, looking proprietary and somber, the supportive colleague playing his part to perfection. My 3 white envelopes sat untouched next to my water glass. The president of the Chamber of Commerce, a portly man named Bill Sanderson, stepped to the podium, his face ruddy with importance. And now, Bill boomed, his voice full of manufactured reverence, it is my distinct honor to present the inaugural Graham Mercer Legacy Award. Graham was a titan of this community, a visionary, and tonight, we are privileged to have with us the woman who stood by him every step of the way, his partner in life and in business, the keeper of his flame and his legacy. Please welcome Greyline Biotech's CFO, Caroline Mercer. The room erupted in applause. It was a standing ovation. This was the story they wanted. The brave widow, taking the stage 24 hours after burying her husband to accept an award in his honor. My 3 cameras were rolling. Tim, my technician, gave me a subtle thumbs up from the back of the room. The audio was hot. My mother rose. She kissed her fingers and touched them to my father's smiling photo on the giant screen behind her. The applause swelled. She took the podium. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Fairpoint. My husband, Graham. He loved this town. He loved this company. His only goal was to build something that would last. A legacy. She paused, her voice catching perfectly. I am. I am just the humble steward of that legacy. She was brilliant. She was laying the groundwork. She was the steward. As the applause began again, I stood up. I walked to the stage, not from the side steps, but directly up the main aisle. I was holding a slim black leather document portfolio. My mother's eyes, mid-smile, locked on me. The smile froze, a flicker of confusion, then annoyance. I was off script. The applause faltered, dying in patches as I reached the stage. I didn't go to her. I went to the second, smaller podium set up for the MC. I placed my portfolio on it and opened it. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through the room. The microphone was perfect, my voice amplified, calm and cold. That was beautiful, and as the head of ethics and control for Greyline, I wanted to add a few words about the mechanics of that legacy. A nervous ripple went through the room. This was not on the program. Bill Sanderson looked confused. My mother's hands gripped the sides of the podium, her knuckles turning white. "I have a short presentation," I said. I nodded to the AV booth. The slide with my father's smiling face was replaced. Black screen, white text, legacy and integrity. "My father taught me many things," I began, my eyes scanning the room, landing on the board members in the front tables. "He taught me how to read a 10K, how to spot anomalies in a supply chain, but most of all, he taught me that a legacy is not defined by the money you accumulate." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It is defined by how you make it, by the rules you follow, especially when no one is watching. My father's legacy is one of integrity," I continued, "and as the person he charged with protecting that integrity, it is my job to ensure that legacy is not a hollow marketing phrase. It is my job to enforce the rules." I advanced the slide. Click. The screen was filled with an image. It wasn't a graph. It was an itemized bill. The Palmetto Bay Hotel, Miami, FL, guest, Mercer, Caroline, room, King Suite, 2, guests, date, 10/23/2025, 10/24/2025. And below it, a bar tab, 2 martinis. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet, I could hear the whir of the projector fan. The whispers started instantly, a sibilant, spreading stain. People were looking at their neighbors. They were remembering the photo from the funeral. "Mom," I said, my voice full of polite, professional curiosity. "At the funeral yesterday, there was a misunderstanding, a photo of you, at this hotel, with a business partner. You texted me this morning. You called him a colleague." Her face was a mask of pale fury. "Lila," she hissed, her voice dangerously low, but the mic picked it up. "This is not the time or the place." "This is the only time and place," I said, my voice unwavering. "I am simply clarifying the record, as required by my role, for the sake of the company's integrity. Was the man in that photo your colleague, this man?" Click. The slide changed. A new document, the corporate registration for Harbor and Slate Consultants. Director, Julian Cross, followed by a high-res photo of Julian Cross from the firm's website. It was, undeniably, the man from the bar. Every head in the room swiveled, as if pulled by a single string, to the head table, to the third row, to Julian Cross. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His face was ashen, his smile gone. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. "Julian Cross," I announced, as if making an introduction. "A Greyline vendor, the strategic consultant on the Project Nautilus acquisition, which, I can confirm, was closed yesterday, the day of my father's funeral." The whispers were now a low, shocked roar. The Fairpoint Gazette reporter at Table 5 was scribbling furiously. "Mom, as CFO, you are, of course, familiar with our corporate code of conduct," I said, pulling the third white envelope from my portfolio. I held up the document. I didn't need the prop. The real one was on the screen. Click. The text was large enough for everyone to read. Greyline Biotech. Code of Conduct and Ethics, Article 7. Conflicts of Interest. Any personal, romantic, or close financial relationship with any active vendor, supplier, or third-party consultant must be immediately and fully disclosed in writing to the head of ethics and the board secretary. I looked at my mother. The camera feed I could see on a small monitor showed a perfect, tight shot of her face. I'm holding your most recent COI disclosure. Mom, signed 3 months ago. In it, you declared that you had no such relationships. Was that, and is that, true? This was it, the moment of the lie. Lila, stop this, she said, her voice shaking, but not with grief, with rage. You are confused. You are grieving. You are hysterical. You are smearing your father's memory. You are smearing me in our darkest hour. How dare you? A few people in the audience murmured in agreement. This was ugly. This was a daughter attacking her mother. I am not confused, I said, my voice slicing through the sympathy. I am not grieving right now. I am an auditor. I am reading from the company bylaws. I turned my attention from her. I looked directly at Julian Cross. I picked up the handheld microphone from the MC's podium and began to walk toward the head table. The wireless signal was strong. Mr. Cross? I said, my voice booming through the speakers. He flinched. The spotlight operator, confused, followed me, and the beam landed on Julian, trapping him. Mr. Cross, as a contractor for Greyline, you are also bound by our supplier code of conduct, which requires you to report any potential conflict of interest. I'll ask you directly, in front of the Fairpoint business community and the Greyline board, did you, or did you not, disclose your personal romantic relationship with the CFO, Caroline Mercer, who was in charge of approving your payments? I held the microphone out to him. He just stared at it. He gulped, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked at my mother. He looked at the exits. Sweat was pouring down his temples. He didn't say a word. Did you, I pressed, disclose this relationship before or after you received this? Click. The final slide, a high-resolution scan of a wire transfer confirmation. Payer, Greyline Biotech, Inc., Payee, Harbor and Slate Consultants, LLC, amount, $420,000 Oz. Memo, Project Nautilus integration fee, authorized by C. Mercer, CFO. The room exploded. This was no longer a family spat. This was a number, a huge, tangible number. This was front-page news. Lila, you've gone mad, my mother shrieked, finally dropping the mask. I have not, I said, returning to my podium. I have just presented the findings of Case 17-11 to the board and to the public. The evidence is irrefutable. The conflict is material. The breach of fiduciary duty is absolute. I looked to the front table, to David Peterson. Mr. Peterson, as the independent board secretary, and in light of this public disclosure, I believe you have a statement to read. David, his face a mask of grim judicial duty, stood up. He walked to the main podium as my mother stepped back, dumbfounded. He unfolded a piece of paper. In light of new information presented to the board, David read, his voice steady, and pursuant to the Greyline Corporate Charter, the Audit Committee, in emergency session, has passed the following resolution. Be it resolved, Caroline Mercer is hereby suspended, effective immediately, from her position as Chief Financial Officer and all other officer-level duties at Greyline Biotech, pending the outcome of a full, independent investigation to be conducted by outside counsel. Be it resolved, all contracts and payments to the vendor Harbor and Slate Consultants are immediately frozen and suspended, pending the same investigation. My mother stared at him. She looked broken, not sad, not angry, just empty. The calculation had failed. This, I said, my voice low but carrying over the stunned silence, is how we protect the legacy. The stunned silence of the ballroom lasted exactly 4 seconds. It was broken by a sound that wasn't a word, but a pure, primal exhalation of rage. No. My mother, her face no longer pale but a dark, mottled red, lunged past David Peterson. She didn't walk to the podium. She seized it. She grabbed the microphone, her knuckles white. The keeper of the flame was gone. The woman who stood there was a cornered animal. "You think you're so clean, don't you?" she spat, her voice a low, venomous hiss that boomed through the ballroom. The audio was perfect. "You stand up there, in your costume, and you judge me? You, with your little files and your rules? Your father, your sainted father, he did the same thing." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. This was no longer a corporate execution. This was a bloodletting. This was the Mercer model tearing itself apart, live on camera. "He did the same thing," she shrieked, her voice breaking. "He had deals. He had friends. He taught me how. He built this company on flexibility." I had expected this, the tu quoque defense. You too, the last resort of the guilty, drag everyone else into the mud. I held up my hand, not in defense, but to command silence. "You're right," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her rage. "He probably did." My mother froze, her accusation hanging in the air, suddenly useless. I turned to my podium and picked up the third, final white envelope. I didn't open it. I held it up for the cameras to see. "My father wasn't a saint," I said, my voice cold and clear. "He was a brilliant, complicated man, and in his last days, he was trying to clean his own house." I nodded to the AV booth. The $420,000 wire transfer vanished. The screen was filled with new text. It was a screenshot of an unsent email draft. From G. Mercer to L. Mercer. The timestamp was from the night he died. The text was large. Subject: "Keep it clean." If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to finish. Keep the company clean, even from me. Your rules, your process, it's the only way. "He wrote this to me," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. He knew there were problems. He knew he was one of them, and he gave me the authority to fix it, even from me." I looked directly at my mother, my gaze a physical force. "So let me be perfectly clear. If I find one piece of credible evidence of my father's wrongdoing, I will add it to Case 1711. I will present it to the board, and I will release it to the press. I will do to his memory exactly what I am doing to you right now." I let the sentence land. "But tonight, I said, my voice hardening again. "I don't have speculation. I have your signature on a false legal disclosure. I have your wire authorizations to your lover. I have your hotel bill. The evidence I have is yours." The room was utterly still. I had just checkmated her. I had taken her only defense and turned it into a testament to my own impartiality. In the third row, Julian Cross saw his opening. The spotlight was off him. My mother was imploding. He stood up, slowly, trying to slide his chair back without a sound. He began to edge his way toward the side exit, his head down. "Mr. Cross," I said, not even looking at him. My voice snapped through the air. He froze. Two uniformed security guards, hired by me for the event and instructed by the chamber to handle any disruptions, stepped in front of the exit. They weren't aggressive. They just stood there, blocks of impassive muscle. Julian Cross sat back down, heavily. He was not going anywhere. A new voice, sharp and authoritative, cut in from the side. "She is correct." Anya Cole, our general counsel, was walking toward the stage. Her face was grim. She was holding her phone up as if it were a sworn affidavit. "I can confirm," Anya said, taking the handheld mic from a stunned David Peterson. "That case 1711 is active. I can also confirm that based on the evidence presented tonight, which I have cross-verified, Grayline Biotech is immediately launching a full, independent, third-party investigation led by outside counsel from Washington, D.C. The board is in full support." It was done. The corporate mechanism had taken over. It was no longer just me, it was the company. I turned back to my podium. I still had one last piece of business. Thank you, Anya. That is the first step in protecting my father's legacy. This is the second. I looked out at the audience, at the dean of the community college, who was watching with wide, terrified eyes. Tonight, Grayline was to be honored for its community leadership. My father believed in that, which is why I am formally announcing the $500,000 Graham Mercer Integrity Scholarship. A confused spatter of applause started, then died. This scholarship, I continued, will be endowed at Fairpoint Community College, and it comes with a simple, binding clause. I'll read it to you. Click, the slide changed. The text of Article 7, the morality clause, filled the screen. Funding is contingent on the finding that no senior officer of Grayline Biotech, including the CFO or CEO, is found by the board or a court of law to be in material breach of the company's code of conduct. My father's name will not be used to fund a company that tolerates fraud, I stated. The board understands this. The money is in escrow. The clock is ticking. This scholarship will be our public guarantee. We will be clean, or we will be publicly shamed for failing him. I turned, finally, back to my mother. She was silent. All the fight had drained out of her. She was just standing there, a woman in a black dress on a brightly lit stage, exposed and empty. I picked up a document from my portfolio. It was David Peterson's ethics pledge that he was supposed to read. I laid it on the podium in front of her. I placed a heavy black fountain pen, my father's pen, on top of it. Tim's camera, the one fixed on the podium, zoomed in. The live feed on the giant screen behind me was now just a tight shot of the document and the pen. And then, my mother's hands. They were shaking, visibly, violently shaking. This is the new pledge, I said, my voice quiet. But the microphone made it intimate, devastating. David was going to read it, but I think it's more powerful if it's signed, as the steward of his legacy, as the keeper of his flame. Mom, would you like to be the first to sign? The entire room, hundreds of people, were holding their breath. They were watching her hands on the jumbotron. She stared at the paper. She saw the name Graham Mercer in the title. Her shaking hand reached out. It hovered over the pen. She looked at me, and for a second, I saw the woman who had raised me. Her eyes were full of a terrible, bottomless hatred. She looked at the pen. She looked at the audience, and then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she pulled her hand back. She placed it at her side. She would not sign. She put the pen down on the table, a final, silent admission. Bill Sanderson, the chamber president, finally jolted into action. He rushed to the MC podium, his face slick with sweat. Ah, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a round of applause for that passionate tribute. We will be taking a brief 10-minute intermission. Please, refresh your drinks. A few people clapped, a hollow, awkward sound, but no one moved, no one stood up, no one went to the bar. They just sat there, staring at the stage, at my mother, at me. The live stream was still hot. The cameras were still rolling. The story wasn't over. I stepped back to my own podium. I looked out at the silent, watchful crowd. We are not destroying a legacy tonight, I said, my voice ringing with absolute, cold conviction. We are protecting it. The intermission never happened. The ballroom remained a frozen tableau of shock. My mother was escorted from the stage, not by security, but by a visibly shaken David Peterson. Julian Cross was invited by the guards to remain for a brief chat with our general counsel, Anya Cole. I didn't stay. My work on that stage was done. I walked down the center aisle, the same way I had walked in. No one spoke to me. No one met my eye. The attendees parted from me as if I were a leper or royalty. There was no difference. I was in my car before the ballroom doors had even closed, but the event was far from over. My phone, plugged into the car's console, began to vibrate. It didn't stop. It wasn't a call. It was a cascade of notifications, a digital waterfall. The Fairpoint Gazette's online editor had been at table 5. He hadn't just written a story. He had taken the Chamber of Commerce's live feed and embedded it directly on the paper's homepage. The headline was a cannon shot. Live. Greyline CFO accused of fraud by daughter at father's legacy gala. The feed, which normally got maybe 200 viewers, was suddenly being hit by thousands, then tens of thousands. A link was posted on a major financial news aggregator, then another. The local clip was going national. My phone buzzed. A new email. Sender. kmartin922@gmail.com. Subject. I was working the bar at the Palmetto. I pulled over into a dark, empty parking lot. My heart, which had been a block of ice all night, gave a single, hard thump. I opened the email. Hi, Ms. Mercer. I don't know if you'll see this. I'm a concierge at the Palmetto Bay in Miami. I was working the lobby bar on the 23rd. I saw your presentation on a news link. The woman, your mother, she was here. With that guy, Cross, they were not quiet about it. They were celebrating closing a deal. She paid the bill. It was her name on the card. She was laughing about how the old man wouldn't know what hit him. It was sick. I'm attaching a copy of her itemized bar receipt. I printed it from the system. Hope this helps. Good for you. Attached was bar receipt C Mercer 1023.pdf. It showed 2 martinis, 2 glasses of champagne, and an order of oysters. Time-stamped 10:50 p.m., the night my father died. While I was still reading it, another notification, a text from an unknown number. Check your secure email, now, a friend in AP. I toggled to my secure corporate email client, the one firewalled from the main server. A new message sat in the encrypted inbox. Sender, anonymous AP Proton. Me. Subject, the camera. You were right to look. The body of the email was short. You're the only one who ever treated us like people, not numbers. Your father was a good man. Your mother? She's not. Her assistant sent this request to IT 2 days before your father died. We all thought it was weird. Now we know why. Don't use my name. Just fix this. Attached was a forwarded email chain. From S. Jennings, Astars, to C. Mercer. To IT Maintenance Queue. Subject, urgent. TM 2501. Maintenance, per CFO request. Please schedule a remote power cycle for SAM 2501 for diagnostic testing. Required downtime, 10:23, 10:02 p.m. East Taz. Please hold all auto alerts. Downtime must be at least 40 minutes. Confirm. And the reply from a low-level IT tech. Confirmed. CAM 2501 will be remotely powered down 10:23 from 10:00 p.m. to 10:45 p.m. Alert suppressed. My breath fogged the cold windshield. This wasn't a 43-minute gap. This was a 45-minute kill zone. Premeditated, requested, a black hole created specifically for a confrontation. My fingers were cold, precise. I didn't reply to either email. I bundled them. The bar receipt, the camera maintenance chain. To Anya, Cole, David. Peterson, Audit Committee Chair. Subject, FWD, Supplemental Evidence, Case 17-11. Attached, Bars Receipt C Mercer 1023.pdf. CM 2501. Request, EML Body. For inclusion in the independent investigation, please add to the file, Lila Mercer, Receipt 1711-006. I hit send. It was logged. It was discoverable. It was permanent. My social media feeds, which I rarely checked, were on fire. The clip of me asking, "Was that, and is that true?" was looping everywhere. The comment section on the Gazette article had over 10,000 entries. This is the coldest thing I have ever seen. Ice Queen. Ice Queen? She's a hero. She's protecting her father from his snake wife. That $420,000? That's our 401k match she's drinking in Miami. Protect Graham Mercer. Rules, not relatives. I work at Grayline. We all knew. Thank God for Lila Mercer. I looked at the stock ticker app, GRLN. It had dipped 12% in after-hours trading as the video spread. A panic. Then, at 8:05 p.m., the official Grayline press wire, triggered by Anya, hit the services. Grayline Biotech suspends CFO, launches independent investigation into conflict of interest. The stock stopped falling. It hovered. Then, slowly, it began to climb back. It regained 3 points, then 5. The market didn't care about the family drama. It hated uncertainty. A secret scandal was a liability. A decisive investigation was a solution. I hadn't destroyed the company's value. I had just lanced a boil. My phone rang. A New York number. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal. I declined. It rang again. Forbes. Declined. It rang again. Local Channel 5. Declined. I opened my LinkedIn profile. It was the only social media I maintained. I had 500+ new connection requests. I ignored them. I typed one sentence, a status update. Rules and codes of conduct are not written for the easy days. They exist specifically for the days when you do not want to use them most. Integrity is a process, not an emotion. I hit post. A new browser tab. I typed Guba, Harbor and Slate, com. The page returned a 404 error. This site can't be reached. Julian Cross, in the middle of his chat with Anya Cole, had found time to try and scrub his existence. He was an amateur. I opened a new tab, web, archive, org. I typed his URL. The Wayback Machine had a perfect snapshot from 3 days ago. His picture, his bio, his list of services, all preserved. I downloaded the PDF of the page and sent it to Anya. Receipt 17-11-007. I was done. I was exhausted. The adrenaline was draining, leaving behind a cold, gray sludge. The grief, which had been a clear, sharp blade, was returning as a dull, crushing weight. My phone buzzed one last time. A text, not a reporter. It was from Masamune Capital, our largest institutional investor, a $300 million stake. Lila, that took guts. We were getting worried about your mother's numbers. The Nautilus deal stank. We are not selling. We stay if you stay. The board knows this. Call me when you're ready to run the place. I read the text. I didn't reply. I had just torched my family. I had just saved the company. I had just become the most powerful and the most hated person in Fairpoint. I looked at the message from the investor. Call me when you're ready to run the place. I turned the phone off. The screen went black, reflecting my own pale, still face. The noise was gone. The digital swarm. The praise. The hatred. The stock tickers. The reporters. All silent. I needed silence. There was one more stitch to make, and this one, I had to do alone. It was 8:00 a.m. The sun was a blinding, merciless white, pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 24th-floor glass boardroom. After the funereal dark of the chapel and the artificial, theatrical glow of the ballroom, this light felt like a disinfectant. It was cold. I was there first. I had set the table. The audit committee filed in, one by one. Eleanor Vance, the chair, a woman who had built her career on dismembering over-leveraged companies, 2 other independent directors. They all looked pale, exhausted. They had clearly been on calls all night. They clutched copies of the Fairpoint Gazette. David Peterson, the board secretary, came next. He nodded at me, his face grim. Anya Cole, our general counsel, took her seat, her laptop already open. Then, the door opened one last time. My mother entered. She was not the hysterical widow from the stage. She was not the loving, grieving wife. She was dressed in a pale cream cashmere suit, her hair perfectly coiffed. She looked soft, expensive, and untouchable. Beside her was a man I didn't recognize, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. Her lawyer. She did not look at me. She took her seat at the opposite end of the long, reflective table. David Peterson cleared his throat. The sound was unnaturally loud. This emergency session of the Audit Committee is hereby called to order. Saturday, October 26th, 8:02 a.m. The purpose is to review the findings of Case 1711 and to vote on the resolutions presented last night. Ms. Mercer, you have the floor. I didn't stand up. I simply placed my hands on the black binder in front of me. Last night was the public summary, I said, my voice flat, echoing slightly in the sterile room. This is the documentation. This is not a presentation. It is a formal submission of the complete chain of evidence. I slid 5 identical binders down the polished table, one for each director, one for Anya, one for David. You will find my signed, notarized affidavit as the cover page, behind it. 28 exhibits, each one hashed and time-stamped. Exhibit A, the verified photograph. Source T, Harris. Exhibit B, the AirTag logs from Miami. Exhibit C, the falsified conflict of interest disclosure. Exhibit D, the complete wire transfer log to Harbor and Slate. Exhibit E, the Project Nautilus brief, highlighting Julian Cross as the sole advisor. Exhibit F, the bar receipt from the Palmetto Bay Hotel. Time-stamped 10:50 p.m., October 23rd. Exhibit G, the IT email chain, originating from your assistant. I nodded at my mother. Requesting the 45-minute security camera outage on the 25th floor for diagnostic testing on the night of my father's death. I finished. The facts are not in dispute. The breach of fiduciary duty is absolute. The gross mismanagement of corporate funds is proven. The conflict of interest is material and was willfully concealed. The only sound in the room was the soft shush of a page turning as Eleanor Vance reviewed the wire transfer log. My mother's new lawyer, whose name I learned was Harrison, leaned forward, all smooth confidence. Ms. Vance, members of the committee, my client, Mrs. Mercer, is, as you can imagine, in a state of profound shock and grief. The tragic loss of her husband, compounded by this shocking and public ambush by her own daughter. He shot me a venomous look. It has rendered her unable to effectively perform her duties. Therefore, Mrs. Mercer is formally requesting an immediate, voluntary, and indefinite leave of absence to focus on her health and her family. It was the move I expected, the soft landing, the dignified exit, allowing her to keep her titles, her stock, and her narrative of the grieving widow. David Peterson didn't even wait for Eleanor. He looked directly at Harrison. Mr. Harrison, voluntary leave is not a procedural option in this circumstance. The Gray Line Corporate Charter, which I have in front of me, is explicit. Article 9, Section 4. When an officer is under formal investigation by the head of ethics for material breach of fiduciary duty, the only option available to this committee is suspension pending termination for cause. He tapped the binder. We follow procedure here, not preference. Harrison's professional smile tightened. Eleanor Vance closed her binder. The sound was a sharp, definitive thud. Thank you, David. Mr. Harrison, your request is noted and denied. We will now proceed to the vote. I trust the board members have reviewed the resolutions. She looked at her 2 colleagues. Resolution 1. To ratify the immediate and indefinite suspension of Caroline Mercer from all duties, titles, access, and compensation as Chief Financial Officer, pending a formal termination for cause. Aye, said the first director. Aye, said the second. Aye, Eleanor said. The resolution passes unanimously. My mother's hand, which had been resting on a notepad, clenched. Resolution 2, Eleanor continued, her voice a relentless monotone. To hire the third-party firm of Covington and Burling, effective immediately, to conduct the full independent investigation and to interface with the District Attorney's Office on all matters relating to Case 1711. Aye. Passed. Resolution 3. to immediately terminate all contracts with Harbor and Slate Consultants, to ban Julian Cross from all company property and systems, and to authorize Anya Cole to initiate all necessary legal action to claw back the $420,000 in unauthorized payments. I passed. Anya Cole was already typing, no doubt drafting the cease and desist letter. Resolution 4, I said, speaking into the silence. Eleanor looked at me. You have a fourth, Ms. Mercer? 2, I said. I move that the board formally approve the $500,000 Graham Mercer Integrity Scholarship with the Ethics Clause, Article 7, intact and non-negotiable. The directors looked at each other. This was public. This was the one piece of good press they had. I passed. And finally, I said, I move that the full, unredacted text of our corporate conflict of interest policy and our whistleblower protection policy be posted publicly on the investor relations page of our website, effective end of day. Eleanor Vance gave me a long, appraising look. She understood. This wasn't just punishment. This was deterrence. I passed. A wise recommendation, Ms. Mercer. In less than 5 minutes, my mother's entire professional life had been dismantled, documented, and filed. That concludes my presentation, I said. I began to gather my files. Harrison was stuffing his briefcase, his face furious, whispering to my mother. She was just staring at the polished, empty surface of the table. As I stood, I found one last item in my lap, a small, simple, white business envelope. It was not a binder, it was thin. I slid it across the table, not into the center, but directly to Anya Cole. Anya raised an eyebrow. More evidence, Lila? No, I said, my voice just loud enough for the entire table to hear. The corporate case is closed. My mother's head, which had been bowed, snapped up. She was listening. That, I said, is a personal item. It's a clean, consolidated report. It contains the GPS telematics from the company-insured vehicle, C. Mercer 01, and the AirTag logs from her luggage. It details her precise movements on the night of October 23rd. Harrison froze. It shows her trip to this building, I continued, my voice soft. Her arrival at 9:15 p.m. It shows her presence on the 25th floor during the 45-minute camera outage that her office requested. It shows her departing the garage at 10:45 p.m., after my father's estimated time of death, and it shows her subsequent drive to the airport to catch a 1:15 a.m. flight to Miami, to meet Mr. Cross. The room was so cold I could feel the skin on my arms tighten. My mother was staring at me, her face white, her mouth open. The look in her eyes was no longer hatred. It was raw, bottomless terror. That is inadmissible, Harrison sputtered. That is private, invasive. It's telematics from a company-insured asset, I replied, and location data from my own property. But you are correct. Mr. Harrison, it's not evidence. For this committee. I looked back at Anya. The company's interests are resolved. I'm not submitting this to Case 1711. I am giving it to you, as a corporate officer, for your records, what the district attorney's office, or the Fairpoint Police, might want to do with that information. Regarding the circumstances of a citizen's death, well, that's not a corporate matter, is it? I had just armed her, and I had just given the company perfect plausible deniability. My mother stared at me. She understood. The $420,000 was a financial crime. This envelope. This was ruin. This was the dark, awful thing I had refused to say on stage. This was the answer to the 43-minute gap. I didn't hold her gaze. I looked at the small, framed photo of my father that sat in the center of the table, the one they used for all board meetings. He was smiling. I looked at his picture. It's clean now. Dad. David Peterson stood up. He snapped his own binder shut. This emergency session of the audit committee is adjourned. The sound of his voice was a gavel. Harrison was frantically whispering, "Caroline, don't say a word. Not one word." But she couldn't. She was just staring at that small white envelope, now in Anya Cole's possession. The directors filed out. Silent. They nodded at me. It was not a friendly nod. It was a nod of respect, of fear. I walked to the door. I did not look back. The heavy glass door slid open with a soft, pneumatic hiss, letting in the normal, mundane sounds of a Saturday morning. There was no applause. There was no outrage. Just the quiet whir of the ventilation system. Just law. And ink. I didn't drive home. I don't know where home is anymore. The house on Willow Ridge, the one built with gray-lined stock and furnished with my mother's impeccable, deceitful taste, was not a home. It was a crime scene. My own apartment, a sterile glass box downtown, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a holding cell. So I just drove. It was Saturday afternoon. The story was 20 hours old. The Fairpoint Gazette's front page, visible in every newsstand I passed, was a split photo. My father's smiling gala picture on one side, and a grainy screenshot from the live stream of my mother's face, frozen in rage, on the other. The headline was simple: The Mercer Legacy. My phone, which I had left off since the 8 a.m. board meeting, lay dark on the passenger seat. I didn't need to turn it on. I knew what I had done. I had executed a perfect public procedural demolition. I had saved the company, and I had orphaned myself. The adrenaline from the boardroom, the cold, clean high of the final vote, the look of raw terror in my mother's eyes when I slid that final envelope to Anya, was gone. In its place was a vast, hollow ache. The grief I had compartmentalized, the grief I had used as fuel, was finally demanding its due. I found myself parked outside the Willow Ridge Chapel. It was exactly 24 hours after the funeral. The air was different. The rain had passed, and the sky was a high, brilliant, unforgiving blue. I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The chapel was empty. The scent of lilies was gone, replaced by the smell of cold stone and old wax. It was silent. Just a room. I had not come empty-handed. In my jacket pocket was a small, 2x4-inch brass plaque. I had ordered it yesterday morning, before the gala, in that small window of absolute certainty. I walked to the front, past the pew where I had sat, past the space where my father's casket had rested. I went to the small memorial alcove where a perpetual candle flickered. I placed the small plaque on the empty wooden lectern beneath it. The engraving was deep and sharp. The Graham Mercer Scholarship, Integrity First. It was finished. His name was now tied to the one thing she couldn't poison. I sat in the front pew. The silence was absolute. I finally turned on my phone. It came alive with a violent, shuddering buzz, a tidal wave of digital noise, 421 texts, 190 emails, 78 voicemails. I saw subject lines from the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Bloomberg. I saw notifications from Masamune Capital. I saw a dozen missed calls from Ron, my father's old partner. And I saw one message, at the very top, from Mother. The contact name felt like a typo. Mother, you burned our house down. You destroyed your family. For what? For a line item? I hope you're happy. I read the words, you burned our house down. She still saw the company, the family, the money, as a single structure, a house to live in. She didn't understand. The house was a fiction. The foundation was rotten. She had been siphoning the funds for demolition, and I had just called the building inspector. My thumbs moved, cold and steady. Me. I didn't start the fire. I just cut the power to a grease fire before it took down the whole block. I hit send. I watched the delivered receipt appear, and then I held down her name. Block this contact? I pressed block. There was only one other thing I needed to see. I opened my browser. I went to the funeral home's memorial page. The link to the live stream was still active. I hit play. I didn't watch the service. I didn't watch Father Thomas's eulogy. I scrubbed forward, past the pained faces, past the empty front pew. I went to the slideshow. I moved past the photo of my parents at the gala. I stopped on the one before it. It was from my graduation at Wharton. 11 years ago. I was in my cap and gown, holding my diploma. My father was beside me, his arms around my shoulders, squeezing me so hard it hurt. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at me. His smile was unguarded, luminous, and so full of pride it was almost painful to see. This was the man, not the CEO, not the ghost in the office. This was the man who had called me late at night, his voice terrified, begging me to keep the company clean. I froze the frame, his smiling, proud face. I leaned forward, alone in the cold chapel. I kept my promise. Dad, I whispered. The silence that answered was, for the first time, peaceful. I stood up. I walked down the center aisle. I pushed open the doors and stepped out onto the stone steps. The sun was weak, but it was bright. I did not look back at the chapel. My phone, still in my hand, vibrated one last time. A text from Anya Cole. Anya. Final press release is out, announcing the independent investigation, the scholarship, and the public posting of the ethics policy. The online sentiment is 90% positive. They're calling you the auditor. The DA's office has formally requested the contents of that personal envelope. I've complied. The wheels of the other, larger machine were turning. The machine I did not control. The one that handled 45-minute gaps in security footage and the sudden deaths of inconvenient husbands. It was out of my hands. It was in theirs. I typed my reply. Me. Thank you. I did one last thing. I opened my Secure Files app. I found the folder I had created 48 hours ago. The folder that had started it all. Public. Inside it sat the screenshot of the AirTag. The text from my mother about her delayed flight. The photo from the bar. It was my personal file. My insurance. My rage. It was redundant now. Everything in it was now Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C, in a sealed corporate case file and a pending district attorney's investigation. It was no longer personal. It was process. I held my thumb on the folder icon. Delete public. All contents will be permanently erased. I pressed delete. It was gone. It was done. There was nothing left to say. There was nothing left to prove. I stood on the steps of the chapel, my phone dark in my hand. From inside the church, I heard a heavy click, the sexton, doing his rounds, shutting things down. The warm, false light from the stained glass windows went out. The chapel was dark. I turned and walked away. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below, share your thoughts, and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.